Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint. Submarines, which is a very interesting, sort of a very hidden game that goes around under the sea. I have with me a veteran submariner, Commodore Singh, who's been on the channel before and spoken about submarines, but today is a little different. I'm going to talk about a little more about the game of cat and mouse that gets played under the sea. Firstly, sir, good evening and thank you for coming in. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adi. It's been a while, but it's always a pleasure to be on your show. Thanks for inviting me on board.
Pleasure's all mine, sir. I wanted to ask you, so there's a big news that came out, and it just got missed by the media as usual. An Indian diesel electric submarine was based not based. It parked itself at Colombo, and the next time it surfaced was in the coast of Africa of Australia. Now, this is a big thing for a single diesel electric submarine to pass through that kind of waters that we're talking about, South China Sea, the entire range, and reach Australia. How do you see this particular move? What are we trying to do here, and what is the significance of something like this?
Yeah, it was in fact a very welcome news to see. And it's Vagir. It's one of the new Scorpion class submarines that have been being built by Mazagon Docks. And one of the six of the Project 75 submarines was, I think, commissioned last year. So it is very encouraging to see that she visited Fremantle all the way to the Australian coast. But, frankly speaking, it's not something that's very unusual in the sense that something extraordinary. Submarines have a considerable underwater endurance uh, and can stay dived for pretty prolonged periods of time with intermittent periods of battery charging. When they actually don't, modern submarines do not actually come on surface. They just raise a particular mast, taken, what is called a snorkel, taken air through that, are able to recharge their batteries and continue on their passage. So obviously, if she went, I don't know whether she went through the Malacca Straits or she goes through one of the other straits. There, even if she went through one of those, she would probably have gone surfaced because the water there doesn't permit a dive submarine to transit through in terms of depth. But once she could have crossed the Malacca Straits and gone east of the Indian Ocean, she would have had a pretty clear run all the way to Australia. I don't know what passage they took. They could have gone through the Indian Ocean and gone south and altered. I'm not sure what was the routing. But notwithstanding whatever the routing may have been, uh, submarines can remain dived. They can do long transits. Often, our submarines have been deployed for long durations at sea, but not very often have they actually gone and visited another port, and that to a port as far as Fremantle in Australia. I think the message this conveys, it's not so much about whether the submarine could do it, most submarines can. I think the message we've conveyed is that we have what we call the sea legs to operate as far away as Australia with our submarines. And that's a message that we've sent, that we also have the power projection capability in the Pacific Ocean as a naval power. Because often it's, one of the limitations navies have is that they may have amazing capability, but are not able to operate very far away from the waters. So our surface ships have been regularly going into the South China Sea. They've been operating in those waters. We do this multi-mission deployment of our surface fleet, where ships are deployed in all over the Indo-Pacific for various reasons. But this is, I think, the first time a submarine has gone that far. And I think it's significant from that perspective, that it has shown that India has the ability to operate even in the undersea domain at distances that are quite considerable. I think what it also conveys is that if we have the right kind of logistic arrangements with friendly countries in the neighborhood, then that increases our reach that much more. We can now send a submarine there. The submarine can berth over there. It can replenish over there, and then it can operate there once it has entered a port. If it can refuel, if it can replenish its supplies, then nothing prevents it from operating in those waters for as long as you want it to. I think that's another message that's conveyed. So I
I
think
mean,
from that perspective, from a power projection capability, India has sent a very significant message by sending Vagir all the way to Fremantle. And I think this is not the first. This will be the first of many more such deployments to follow.
I think this particular line should be sent to Xi Jinping, sir. He's going to have a bit of a stroke.
Hmm.
The reason I bring this up, sir, because the power of the submarine today is coming out to be a very important thing because of long range vectors that all adversaries of all major countries in the world have. These vectors are, targeting vessels at 2,000 kilometers, 2,500, 3,000 kilometers. Uh, h- what is a new angle that a submarine would be able to bring in towards India's projection of power, which cannot be done on the surface? And how do we kind of leverage this particular thing going forward, especially with regards to the Chinese activities, sir?
I think fundamentally the submarine's greatest asset is its ability to operate below the surface, and therefore stealth and concealment make it are the two most important attributes of a submarine. With the advancements in technology that are taking place, the surface of the sea is becoming increasingly transparent. There are long
Sorry.
range maritime patrol aircraft, there are unmanned aerial vehicles, there are satellites. So, the ability of large surface forces to operate at sea for long durations undetected uh, is going to be difficult in the future. Uh, so, obviously, the commander at sea on a surface, commanding a surface force, may have some limitations in his ability to maneuver and his options available to him at sea because his presence would be known. That fleet's presence would perhaps be known to the enemy, and
Hmm.
probably the fleet could be detected and thereafter tracked. The submarine, on the other hand, is operating much below the surface of the sea, which is still quite opaque in terms of detection. Submarines now have got impressive endurance and range and weapon capabilities, including land attack missiles. The Tomahawk cruise missile, which the Americans use, can fire onto land targets as deep as 750 kilometers in on land. So it opens up. You can with the submarine, you can open up a whole new front in a conflict from the sea, attacking land targets from the sea. That's number one.
Hmm. Hmm.
Number two, because submarines can operate for long durations far away from their own home ports, they're a threat to any surface force that is trying to operate even in the open ocean environment, not necessarily in just shallow waters. Obviously, India is now in a position where we are the major maritime power in the Indian Ocean. We'd like to remain so. Uh, China is impressively enhancing its naval capabilities, both in terms of force levels as well as weapons and technology and sensors, etc. So I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the decade, the PLA Navy, which already has a permanent presence in the Indian Ocean, would have a far more substantial presence in the Indian Ocean, including perhaps the basing of a carrier battle group once it has its 3 or 4 aircraft carriers in commission, and once they become more confident in operating aircraft carriers far away from their home ports. Once
Hmm.
that happens, they would definitely try and pressurize India in the Indian Ocean because for them, the Indian Ocean provides the gateway to the Atlantic. And if they have to realize their global maritime, the global ambitions of being a or becoming a superpower by 2049, being dominant in the maritime domain is a prerequisite to that. All large powers which have dominated the world have done so on the basis of their maritime power, because that is what gives you reach right across oceans and right across continents. Once
So
that
this seems.
happens,
Sorry. Please go
Once
ahead,
that
sir.
happens, if India is to check this Chinese influence and continue to retain the competitive edge, we have to have a submarine capability that uh, constrains the Chinese ability to operate in the Indian Ocean. For that, we need
Hmm.
actually what we need ideally is conventionally armed nuclear attack submarines, which are what we call SSNs. We need those. We don't have them at the moment. So, but that does not necessarily mean that our current fleet of conventional submarines cannot do the same job because they're also well armed. And like this passage to Fremantle is proved, they have the capability to stay down for long durations of time and can cause a fair amount of discomfort in any surface force that is opposed to it. So I think from that perspective, the submarine becomes a very important platform to project India's power, at least in the Indian Ocean, and to help India retain that maritime edge in the Indian Ocean, notwithstanding whatever be the kind of opposition that India would be faced with in the next 10 or 15 years.
So how do you see the links, which are naval links that have been created in the South China Sea region with various different countries, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia? with regards to joint patrolling, with regards to training, with regards to naval activities of various different kinds. How do you see that as a power projection within the Indian Ocean? And you also have towards this is the east, and you also have the west, where you're kind of looking at you've kind of got approvals for naval basing and repair and maintenance and a whole lot of other things in Oman, and there's some talks about various other ports in the west as well. How do you see this particular game which is being played as a counter to China, sir?
I think India's foreign policy outreach in the last decade has been extremely impressive. Our Act East policy, now our, well, more or less Act West, is what we've been seeing over the last year or two. Tremendous amount of initiatives towards the West as well, has been very impressive. I think it has borne fruit. It has projected India's position in the Indo-Pacific as a major power of reckoning. Uh, we have comprehensive strategic relationships with almost all friendly countries in the region, both in the East and the West. We have these 2+2 with Australia, Japan, the US. We have foundational agreements on logistics, communication, intelligence sharing, etc., with the US. And perhaps similar arrangements are in the offing with the other countries as well. So I think all this has contributed greatly towards establishing India as a major, not only maritime, but a major power in the Indo-Pacific. Not that it wasn't, but now it's becoming more and more evident that India is making tremendous effort to be one and to be seen as one. That's important
Mm.
as well. And this, I think, is very important because we all know what the Chinese ambitions are. They may be cloaked in any amount of sweet talk, but the fact of the matter is that the stronger the like-minded countries can project power in this region, the more China would be constrained in its attempts to reach out and project power beyond the South China Sea or beyond the Western Pacific and in the Indian Ocean. And I think that is important. China's domination of the South China Sea is an indication of what it can do when it wants to dominate something. It does. It's a my way or the highway approach.
Mhm.
Uh, it's trying to reorient the international order at sea with initiatives like the Belt and Road, and saying why can't we have an international order based on Chinese characteristics, which obviously we all know what that means. So the bottom line is that India has to be able. India tie up with so many countries, both on the east and the west, ensures that at least the Indian Navy can now operate far away from our harbors. We have this kind of support. We can replenish it so many other ports. We can have a presence there of various kinds. Uh, we can sort of deploy from there onward. That is why when our ships now go on foreign tours or they go to visit foreign ports, we've changed the nomenclature. When I joined the Navy, it used to be goodwill visits. We used to go on goodwill visits to various countries. The fleet went on a goodwill visit. Goodwill visit was thereafter changed because that had a very diplomatic connotation.
Mm. Mm.
That got changed to something called overseas deployments. So then we used to go on overseas deployments because they were part of building a relationship with the navy we were visiting, exercising with that navy that we were the country that we were visiting. So it was more of a deployment. It was not necessarily just a goodwill visit. And now, of course, we have this multi-mission deployment where ships are around all the time, 14 to 15 ships patrolling in different parts of the Indo-Pacific and visiting ports as a routine exercise. Countries in the neighborhood for replenishment, for exercising, for whatever. That's one part of it. The second you referred to was on things like defense exports. You talked about training. Training is extremely important. That's an extremely effective and important tool of military diplomacy. And India has been very active. The Indian Armed Forces are very proud of their ability to train. Training is one of the strength areas of the Indian Armed Forces. And this has been acknowledged by militaries across the region. And so more and more countries now want to train with the Indian Armed Forces in Indian training establishments. It's not something new. We've been training officers from abroad for many, many years, but that number has increased. So be it, specialist training schools of the Navy, like the Gunnery School or the Anti-Submarine Warfare School or the Signal School, or be it the Staff College. And as we go up the ladder, it could be the Naval War College, the National Defense College. We've had officers from friendly foreign countries doing courses there for many, many years, but this number has increased in the last few years. And it's a great tool because India then decides the countries it wants to engage more with and provides
Hmm.
more opportunities for their people to come and train in India.
Yeah.
So that's a big gives a big boost. Firstly, because uh, those countries are sort of obliged to India because you're training their people, and secondly, I think is the fact that once an officer spends a year in India or a year and a half doing a course, he does go back with a certain understanding of the country.
Hmm.
And in due course, if that officer reaches a level where he can shape opinion in his own country, and a lot of them do because by and large countries send their best and brightest abroad, it helps because then he presents a positive picture of what he saw and what he experienced and what the kind of relationship can be in the military domain. So I think from that perspective, training is a very important aspect. Defense exports is another area we're laying a lot of emphasis on to friendly foreign countries. Philippines, for one, you alluded to Philippines. We signed a deal for the BrahMos missile.
Yes.
We've just given a corvette to Vietnam. Now the corvette by itself is not everyone's. There were people asking questions. What will the corvette do? What It's not going to change the dynamics of the South China Sea. It's not
Hmm.
going to change the dynamics of the South China Sea. It's not meant to change the dynamics of the South China Sea, but it's meant to convey a strong message to the people who need to hear that message. That look, we are now here. We have friendly foreign countries here. We have a presence here. We have deep engagement with them, and this is just the beginning, but certainly over the years we will develop this relationship. For
Indeed,
example, the
that
way so that is an important dimension of military diplomacy as well. So
indeed. So
as
you
far
were
as
giving me
patrols go,
examples earlier.
but as such, India has never done a joint patrol with anyone. Joint patrols have
Okay.
a very different connotation from what we call coordinated patrols,
Hmm.
corpats. We have been doing coordinated patrols with many countries in Southeast Asia, including Thailand and Singapore, and in the Straits of Malacca against piracy, etc. So we've been doing coordinated patrols. Joint patrols is done more by allies. So we are not really ever done something called a joint patrol because that has a different military connotation. Since we are not aligned with anybody, since we have a strategic autonomy. So far, we have been doing coordinated patrols,
So
and
how do
we
you
will
see?
continue to do so.
Absolutely. How do you see the deal with France with regards, specifically with regards to submarines? Uh, France seems to be a very dependable player that I think India is going back to with regards the technology of subs. And there is also news about making of a submarine related reactor within India with regards to some technology transfer that is coming from abroad and some indigenous developments. How do you see these things combined together in as a focus towards submarine, the submarine division of the Navy, sir?
Ever since 1998, when the world imposed sanctions on us, the Western world imposed sanctions on us following our nuclear
Mhm.
tests in May 1998, France was the only Western country which did not do
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
And that was the start point of what has emerged as a very deep strategic bilateral relationship between the two countries. Today, I think we consider France as our most reliable
Hmm.
uh, defense partner,
Yeah.
even more so perhaps than Russia, which in the good old days of the Soviet Union, one couldn't think of looking beyond them. We have now sort of, I would say we've distanced ourselves from Russia, but we have sort of diversified more.
Diversified.
We're not
Hmm.
wholly dependent on Russia anymore.
Yeah.
Even though even now we bought some impressive equipment from them. We have the S-400 system, which is a strategic air defense platform, and which will ensure that we have to continue to deal with Russia for the next 25, 30 years if nothing else to support the system. So obviously that relationship is not necessarily uh, on the downward spiral, but it is not as, I mean, we've moved on. Let me put it that way. We moved on. We have a deeper engagement with the West and particularly with France. So in 2005, as you're aware, the Project 75 submarines, 6 submarines to be built indigenously with foreign collaboration, was run by France, that contract. And thereafter, these 6 Scorpion-class submarines called Project 75 have been built in Mazagon docks, 5 of which have been commissioned. And the sixth, Bagshir, is presently undergoing sea trials and will probably be commissioned next year. So we have these 6 submarines that we've got this industrial cooperation with France about building submarines in India with their design. Uh, Thereafter, we were working on the Project 75. Vagir is one of these Project 75 submarines,
Yeah.
submarine which went to Fremantle. Uh, we also have an ongoing program called the Project 75 India,
I. Hmm.
P75I, which is about building another 6 conventional submarines in an Indian shipyard with foreign collaboration. This is all part of the 1999 30-year plan for indigenous submarine construction, which of course is running way behind schedule, but this is part of that. 75I is at the moment facing some delays because it's a very complex program. It involves a great deal of indigenization. It involves a great deal of future and deep transfer of technology, because India wants to uh, obtain enough technology with Project 75I to be able to design and build its own submarines thereafter and not go to
On.
any foreign collaborator. So this will obviously take time because
Yeah.
every country wants to protect its own IP, etc., etc. So this is going to be a more complex program. So it's going to the negotiations, the discussions, it's going to take time. Now, 75I is already delayed, considerably delayed. Otherwise, by now it should have been up and running. As a result, there are two things are happening. One, of course, is that Mazagon Docks, Mumbai, which has invested a lot of money in developing the submarine building capability with the Scorpion program, has no orders thereafter. It's still awaiting an order for anything else. So this facility or this capability that is developed, it's this ecosystem that of Indian industry, its own skills in submarine welding, etc. It doesn't want to fritter that away. It should not fritter that away because we'll have to start all over again. We've done it. We've paid the price once when we stopped production with German submarines after two of them had been built in 92 and 94, and we literally had to start all over again in 2005. So that is very important that production line continues running. That is number one. Number two, of our present crop of 16 submarines, except for the 5 Scorpion class, the rest are all more than 25 years old. Some are as old as 37 to 38 years old. Now, while they are still in good operational condition because we've constantly upgraded them, maintained them, modernized them, certified them as safe at sea, age is age. And 70 submarines to the 75I program could take up to 10 years for the first submarine to get built, which means that by another 10 years from now, if we don't have any other submarine coming in the pipeline, all these submarines will be 10 years older than what they are today, which means they'll be really old. I mean, we'll have boats like Sindhu, which was commissioned in 86, let's say operating in 2031, which will be 45 years old by then. So that's notwithstanding however modern you may make a submarine, but age takes its own toll on a
Yep.
hull, etc. So from that perspective, it was important that we must have some sort of submarine building in the pipeline. And therefore, I think this recent announcement that Prime Minister Modi and during Prime Minister Modi's visit to France about 3 more Project 75 submarines to be built by Mazagon Docks came about. This is basically for, like I said, for 2 reasons. One, to keep the submarine building facility going in India, and secondly, to meet the shortfall in force levels that we're likely to experience in the next few years. So this contract is expected to move smoother because we already have a similar contract on which we are building 6 submarines. So it will be easier to negotiate. It will be, a lot of things already in place. The Indian partners are in place. They've already done some work on this Project 75 submarines. If they have to build 3 more of the same type, Mazagon Docks will be able to go about it far more effectively and will be able to build quicker. So we expect that, I think the anticipation is that if a contract for this is to be signed, it will probably get signed by the end of next year. It will take that much time. And 6 or 7 years from then, we'll be able to produce the first submarine. So if we go for these 3 follow-on submarines, the first Scorpion follow-on should be available by 2031 or so if all goes well. Whereas Project 75I could take a little longer. And that is why it's important that's why these 3 submarines
Both have to continue.
have been negotiated. That's one. Secondly, we come to the nuclear submarine program. India has always had an intention to build 6 SSNs, that means conventionally armed nuclear propelled submarines. The CCS has already given approval for the design study, which is over, and now CCS approval for going in for 6 of these is awaited. These are going to be hugely expensive programs, and that is why I think there is a little hesitation on how many we need, how fast can we go about it, because it requires a considerable financial outlay. But I expect that sooner rather than later, some number will get approved. May not be 6, maybe 3, maybe 4. So it will happen. It's just that when will it happen? It's not a question of if, it is a question of when.
When?
So far, we've had a very close work relationship with the Russians in developing nuclear submarine technology. Our SSBNs, the big boats, the ballistic missile armed conventional submarine, the nuclear submarines, like the Arihant. Uh, the reactor in that has obviously been built with some amount of assistance from Russia. Similar technologies have been used. We have operated Russian submarines, Russian nuclear submarines. They've leased us two SSNs at various times. One was from 88 to 91, another one from 2012, which went back in 2021. And there was negotiation in progress for a third submarine to be leased from 2025 onwards. I don't know what is the fate of that or the state of that, whether it's going to happen or not, particularly now with this whole Russia-Ukraine imbroglio, etc. But notwithstanding, we've had a close working relationship with the Russians in developing nuclear submarine technologies. Now I understand from the media, there were some reports that France is very keen to share nuclear submarine technology with India and help develop nuclear attack submarines, the SSNs, for India. Now, French nuclear reactor technology and Russian nuclear reactor technology are not quite similar. They're two different technologies. Now, whether India wants to continue going down the path of the Russian nuclear submarine technology, where it has reached a certain degree of maturity already, or it decides to go down a different path because it sees a more dividend coming out of a deeper relationship with France in this regard, that is something that we don't know as yet. That is something I'm sure that is being deliberated at the highest levels, because everything will involve a cost and a time. And when we're talking things like nuclear reactor technology, we're talking of a very deep strategic relationship between two countries. So there will be a great political and foreign policy
Yeah.
dimension also to a decision on this. So we'll have to wait and watch. But definitely the French are very keen, from what I understand, to help India develop its nuclear submarine technologies, nuclear submarine reactors for the SSN program. So let us see where that actually goes.
So recently we got a news, and can't really put my finger onto it, but it's more or less a lot of people have kind of agreed to it, is that the Chinese lost one nuclear submarine in the Yellow Sea. One can't prove it, but let's, for the heck of a discussion, I want to kind of put it across as real at the moment. They say that one of their anti-submarine wires and stuff like that, this thing got entangled in that, and it just lost, this thing depressurized and it finished, and it, I don't know, bubbled up to the surface. Some news reports say that it was tugged back, and these tugs were photographed by a lot of patrolling aircraft. These tugs were tracked down by a lot of these guys who track maritime activity. There's pictures available all over the place. Keeping that aside, so, you know, this accident just tells you the kind of training, the kind of setup, the kind of back end which is required for a, you know, nuclear submarine to be in the force and to be able to actually conduct patrols, conduct activities or operations or missions and stuff like that. How do you see this entire thing, especially with the Chinese game? Because we also remember in 2003, I think they lost one of their major submarines as well. There was a freak accident that took place, took about 70 or 80 people's lives. How do you see this, these kind of accidents from China, and what can we learn from them, sir?
See, firstly, regarding the recent news that's come about Chinese probably having lost a nuclear submarine,
Yeah,
it's not really been substantiated, frankly
yeah,
speaking.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, Taiwan straight away came up and said there's been no news of a submarine accident.
Mm.
So I'm not sure whether a submarine has actually sunk, or Chinese nuclear submarine has sunk. If it has sunk, obviously it could not have been salvaged so fast as to be taken back by tugs all the way back to China. That's not possible.
Mm.
So there may have been a breakdown or something which has been photographed and now being sort of, people are making 2 + 2 into 5. But so far, I am not sure that any Chinese submarine has sunk. Otherwise, there would have been a lot more news in the media
Yeah, yeah,
about
yeah,
that.
of course, of
There would have
course.
been submarine rescue efforts in progress. The Americans would have definitely, put more assets in the area to check whether anything like this could have happened. And when it comes to submarine search and rescue, uh, uh, relationships between countries don't matter. It's a humanitarian thing.
Yeah.
Everybody and anybody who has a submarine rescue capability would be there or would try and be there to help
We did the
salvage or
same with
save
the
a submarine
Chinese.
instantly. So it
For that
doesn't matter
aircraft,
whom
we
it
did the
belongs to.
same. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
China
yeah.
has its own submarine rescue capability. In fact, in the South China Sea area, Singapore has one, China has one, the US it can fly out their facility from San Diego. So there is no dearth of submarine rescue capability in those waters. South Korea has, Japan has, everybody has. That's why I'm not really sure that any submarine is sunk, because there hasn't been enough in the media after that to suggest something of the sort, or any
Yeah.
authoritative reports suggesting such a thing has happened. There's been silence all around. But look, a submarine is a submarine is a submarine. it is capable. Any submarine can meet with an accident. After all, it's a piece of machinery. Some machinery can pack up. Uh, Human error is a big element. You have to be very well trained to operate submarines. You have to be very sharp all the time. Mistakes can happen. One man's mistake can take a submarine down in a crew. The crew has to work like a very well-oiled machine, which is where the differentiation comes between operating submarines and operating ships. Because in submarine you cannot afford to be lax at any given time, even for an instant, because the consequences can be disastrous. Russia has lost many submarines, as you're aware. The last one was, of course, in 2000, was a terrible accident.
Yeah.
India, of course, fortunately, has had a very good track record. We have a 100% track record. The Americans haven't lost a submarine for some time, but they've also lost submarines at various stages.
4, 5 of them, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the Chinese, insofar as submarine operations go, have a fair amount of experience in operating submarines. They've been operating submarines from before we are operating submarines. They've been operating nuclear submarines now since the 80s, when they built their first Han class
Yeah.
SSBN. And they've been operating SSNs now for a fair amount of time. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that they lack the capability to operate nuclear submarines, and that is why they've had an accident if they've had one. It's obviously, if such a thing has happened, it could be a mechanical failure, it could be a technical failure, it could be human failure, it could be one of many things. So, keeping the accident aside, if at all one has happened, yes, any navy submarine platforms are limited by numbers because of their cost and the ability to operate them and maintain them and support them. So, a loss of a platform, a submarine platform, can be quite a devastating loss to a navy's capability, particularly in China's case, where it is looking to expand its capabilities and expand its power projection, expand its reach. Every asset is valuable, and nothing more is more valuable than an SSN, because its complete submarine deployment concept in the Indian Ocean at the moment is on SSN. They don't have the capability yet to operate their conventional submarines so far away from the Chinese mainland, and therefore a lot hinges on their nuclear submarine capability to establish their sort of maritime presence, or let me put it, a substantial maritime presence in the Indian Ocean, where they can cause some kind of discomfort to India. So I think from that perspective, they need all the submarines they have and more. But if we are suggesting that they've lost a submarine, I'm not so sure that has happened, actually. But we will come to know by and by, with
Yeah.
Western intelligence, we'll be able to find out how many boats are actually going to sea and what's actually happening. So things will emerge. But
Yeah.
prima facie, I don't think a submarine has actually been lost.
Actually, why I asked this is because there have been two accidents in the past year now. This one allegedly, and the second one where the Americans hit something under the ocean.
Yeah, in the South
So,
China Sea, one of the American boats hit.
this
Now,
it
what
be,
it hit. That's also never really come out clearly as to what it hit. Obviously,
yeah,
inquiries into submarine accidents are all very classified in nature.
quiet. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
whatever little is released to the media or the media speculates on can be pretty far from the actual truth of what actually happened. And
Yeah.
sure enough, no submarine accident, particularly if it is due to human failure or navigation failure, is going to be released to the media, whatever be the
Sure.
internal report on that. But
Lastly,
like I
sir,
said, these are platforms which are operating in a very unfamiliar environment, in a very unforgiving environment, and therefore, uh, you have to be very alert at all times. We have this thing in the submarine arm. In the good old days, our standing orders to start with a one-liner, which said submarines are safe until you forget that they can be dangerous, which effectively means you can't afford to relax. You know,
absolutely.
you have to be on it. You have to be alert, vigilant, and professionally very, very sound at all times to be able to operate submarines safely.
Lastly, sir, I'd like to ask you is about the you mentioned about the ecosystem that we are talking about in India, and to keep it alive. The ecosystem till now has been very restricted, and we've seen in the past couple of years the government has come out and actually opened up that ecosystem with regards to research, development, and stuff like that. How do you see that impacting? And do you see any private players kind of coming up? I'm not saying building construction because that costs a lot of money, huge amount of area, infrastructure, and all that stuff. But with regards to research, do you see private players, private entities getting into research of underwater vessels, various other systems? We also know about the AIP, which is being developed, and I believe there's another private player that is doing some other work with it as well. How do you see that ecosystem building up within the country? Because the restrictions, if I may, have been removed.
No, no, there's been a very encouraging trend over the last 3 or 4 years. Let me admit that it's, in developing an indigenous military-industrial complex. It has been very encouraging because now two things that we have understood and we have realized, not that we didn't know it earlier, is that if we want to be a part of any reckoning, we, we cannot be dependent on others for our military hardware, for our
Hmm.
military preparedness. We have to be able to do it within the country because otherwise it's a major strategic vulnerability. Anyone can turn off the tap at any time and you're left high and dry. It has happened before. Like I said, post the 1998 nuclear tests, the West imposed sanctions on us. A lot of our equipment became unserviceable because we couldn't
Yeah.
get support from the West to maintain it. So I think so that Atmanirbharta that we're talking about, there's this word Atmanirbharta, which is now the buzzword, is very relevant. How we're going about it uh, is another matter. Are we going about it the right way? By and large, yes, but there are areas which need to be addressed, which
Sure.
perhaps time will address sooner rather than later. Insofar as the ecosystem goes, a lot of effort is being made to get the private sector on board. A lot of what used to earlier be very restrictive contracts have now been opened up to the private sector as well. They can
Hmm.
participate in areas like electronic warfare, in areas like shipbuilding, where even though the government insisted that it's a level playing field and it's open competition, what we actually saw in reality was something quite different. But the fact is that that has changed a lot now. And therefore, I think it is very important to develop the ecosystem and then ensure that it remains developed. Now, that is where so far how the problem was that you would request industry or you would expect industry to make an investment. You would expect industry to become part of the system, but you would not give any assurance to industry as to what is the industry going to get as a return on investment or return on its R&D effort. I mean, I could have, let's say hypothetically, let's take submarines. Now we're talking about submarines. Okay. So far, Mazagon Docks was the only shipyard in India which could build submarines
Yeah.
because it was done so historically. And they've created an ecosystem of tier one, tier two, tier three vendors. Now, had this program stopped with 6 submarines and another program not initiated for another 5 years or 6 years, this ecosystem would fall apart. These guys who
Absolutely.
developed these skills would have to look elsewhere for business because there was no business coming from Mazagon Dock. So when you're looking at defense, you see the difference between defense and any other business is that in the defense business, there is only one customer, the government of India. So if the government of India is buying something, you're in business. If the government of India is not buying something, you're not in business. You can't go out to 10 different guys and say, it's not the automobile industry where market forces decide the size of the market or the strength of the market. Here, there is only
True.
one customer. That customer, therefore, has to give assurance to the industry that, look, I am there for you. I am a customer and I will remain your customer for long. So that is where there has been a hesitation on the part of private industry to make the necessary investment in R&D, and therefore our R&D spend is very very low compared to any other country. The US spends 3% of its GDP on R&D, and I'm talking military R&D. I'm talking R&D. You know
Hmm.
what the GDP of the US is, so you can imagine what 3% of that amount is. We spend 0.6% of our GDP. Our GDP is 1/6 the size of America or 1/9 the size of America's. And we spend just 1/5 of the percentage of they spend on their R&D. So we really spend a minuscule amount. And therefore, if we have to go in for cutting edge technologies, and let me tell you, no country is going to part with its cutting edge technologies. The governments won't give so clearance. So you'll always be getting a technology that's a generation old.
Second two.
If we
Hmm.
have to make this, if we have to leapfrog this technology curve, this learning curve, we have to make that investment, number one. Secondly, the advantage today is with lots of disruptive technologies coming in AI and ML, etc., etc. Even now, with finding more and more applications in the defense sector, autonomous, unmanned. I think this is where India's strength really lies. We don't need to make capital intensive investments to be able to leapfrog this technology curve
Yes.
in areas like
Hmm.
AI, unmanned, autonomous, because we have a very strong scientific temper in this country. And we're doing some remarkable work. If you see some of these young startups, they're doing remarkable work. What they have to do now is they have to scale up to a level where they're able to provide adequate capacity and capability to the defense sector. Here, the defense sector, the government also has to play a role in giving them that encouragement. Industry has to play a role. The bigger companies have to nurture these MSMEs and small startups into becoming part of their supply chain, and that is the way our defense industrial complex is mature. Uh, two or three important things have happened. In the last 2 years, the defense budget, the capital portion of defense budget, capital portion of defense budget is for new acquisitions, modernization, etc. It has been mandated. I think this year's budget said 68% of all capital spend has to be in Indian rupees, which means has to be to Indian industry.
Yep.
So it's mandated now. So you can't sort of find a shortcut and go abroad and get something. You have to find, if you want it, you have to find it in India, which is, I think, very good. Whether 68% will happen or not, whether it's happening at the high-end technology, uh, that's a matter of
Take some time, sir. Yeah.
interpretation. But the wheels have been set in motion. Defense exports has been given a lot of support. We have want to export, I think, 5 billion worth of defense equipment by 2025. That's the target, $5 billion. So that has become. So you see now, when we have the Def Expo, the defense minister himself is actively canvassing for Indian exports, Indian defense items to be exported to foreign countries. Obviously, we don't expect the Western world to be buying our equipment because they're way ahead in technology. But friendly foreign countries, third world countries who can afford our
Why not?
equipment, certainly. And that is why if you see the Defense Expo, we have an African defense ministers conclave there. We are actively engaging with Southeast Asia. Like I said earlier, we're exporting the BrahMos missile to Philippines. We are probably going to do a lot in the shipbuilding area for countries in the region. So that is not only going to help us build up our defense industrial capability, but also is an important tool of military diplomacy for us. So defense exports is something we should be looking at very, very intently. And I'm glad that we are. It will start small. We'll export one odd thing here, one odd thing there, but it will build up. So I think from a defense military industrial perspective, a lot of wheels have been set in motion. Where they turn out ultimately, Navy's always been at the forefront. We're building all our ships in India, with the indigenous content in each one progressively increasing. There are certain areas where we still don't have capability, like for example, propulsion systems, certain weapons. But we are heading in that direction. We are trying to encourage Indian industry to develop these kind of systems. You've seen the jet engine deal that's happened with France and the US. That's been a major weakness in our aeronautical sector. We never could develop our own engine despite a lot of effort. But if we get that sort of technology, it'll start with screwdriver technology. Let me be very clear on that. Don't expect some deep, them sharing software and things like critical parts and all. They will not do that. But once the wheels have been set in motion, once we at least get that what we call screwdriver technology, because it will basically be assembly on design drawings that will come from there, we will ourselves develop the skills. Our scientists are second to none. They just need the right environment to be able to employ those skills. And so I think the future is promising. Perhaps needs to be accelerated a bit because the world will otherwise pass us by. But in terms of disruptive technology, certainly a lot is happening in the unmanned sector. The Navy has something called an unmanned plan. There's a classified version of that and a roadmap and an unclassified version of that. I haven't seen the unclassified version. It's only being shared with Indian industry and with specific people who are in the game. But from what seems to be emerging from that, there's a very wide sort of spectrum of capability in the unmanned domain that India is looking at in the next maybe 5, 7, 10 years. And if all that does fructify, we'll be quite a force to reckon with in these highly competitive, cutting edge sort of technologies of the future.
I'm glad I had this podcast. So at least I know a whole lot of new things with regards to tech
So
and
in a
building
nutshell,
things.
we aren't doing too badly. We shouldn't be cynical. We tend to be very
Yeah,
cynical when it comes
very
to
cynical.
our defense industrial capability, our defense, indigenization efforts and all. So I think the time to be cynical is over. There will be setbacks, but I think we should look at the future far more
That's
positively than
part of
we
the
have
game.
so far. Yeah,
That's part of the game. So even the biggest countries in the world have setbacks,
that's right.
and these
That's right.
these guys have been building defense tech for 100 years, so they still have setbacks. So that's fine. That's all
Yeah,
right. I don't think we should be worried about setbacks. It's the effort and it's the intent which actually matters more.
true.
So thanks so much. I mean, I do hope the next podcast is not after this long a break, and I really, it's always a learning experience talking to you. Let's connect more often so that you can actually help us learn a little more about maritime affairs, because I guess we have put the map upside down. You see
Yeah,
the outreach to Greece, you see the upcoming visit to Indonesia, you can actually see that Indian Ocean chain that we are trying to build up coming up. So I'd love to talk to you someday about that. And till then, sir, Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, Adi. It was a pleasure as always. And like you said, seeing the map upside down and seeing where India's position is when you put the map upside down gives a whole different perspective
Yeah.
to where India is and where it should be. Yeah. Thank you
Right.
very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.